What is atheism? Atheism is rejecting belief in any form of unseen divinity.
You know, when the first words of an argument are ridiculously factually incorrect and weirdly confusing,
I'm not even mad. That's amazing.
it's probably best to walk away. But if everyone walked, then the wielder would feel impenetrable. And so, consider this an act of charity. This is Atheism is Over, Debunked.
The atheist denies the existence of a creator, of divine revelation, and of resurrection.
One of the first mistakes that theists make, and I put the word mistake in quote marks because it's often not one, is to strawman atheists by insisting that their position is something other than what it is, and so let me clear that up. A theist is someone who believes that at least one God exists, and an atheist, with the prefix a meaning non, not, or without, is a non-theist. That's it. An atheist is simply someone who isn't convinced that a God exists. There's no denial of unseen divinity, resurrection, or indeed anything. It's a non-belief, a non-position, and really, it shouldn't even be a word.
What is the proof that there is a creator? There are many proofs.
Yeah, and I've already addressed 9 of which you've presented in a previous video.
But we will focus on 2. The first is called proof on the basis of existence. And the second is called proof on the basis of providence. What is meant by proof on the basis of existence? Everything is temporarily originated. It came into existence after it was non-existent, so it must have had an originator.
So first off, due to the law of conservation of energy, we know that when something comes into existence, be it a pocket watch or a sandstone, it doesn't do so from non-existence. It does so via the rearrangement of already existing matter. A sandstone, for example, doesn't just poof into existence ex nihilo. It comes into existence due to fragments of minerals compacting over time. And secondly, note that the originator or creator of sandstones is the unconscious laws of nature, and not a conscious being, because theists like to jump from something to someone without sufficient reason, and this is but one example.
This means we have 10 to the 124th proofs that a creator exists. This number constitutes the overall number of molecules with their functional activities throughout the universe.
For crying out loud, what orifice did you pull that number from? To justly say,
this number constitutes the overall number of molecules with their functional activities throughout the universe.
You'd first have to observe the entire universe, which you haven't, and then you'd have to account for every single molecule, which by extension you haven't. This is absolutely ridiculous.
By the way, this number is huge. It means 10 followed by 124 zeros. So everything that originated and entered the sphere of existence is a proof that there is a creator.
And again, while we can arbitrarily call whatever caused something to come into existence its originator or creator, we can't just assume that this creator is a someone rather than a something. And we certainly can't assume that it's a very specific someone, can we? That wouldn't even be remotely logical.
That is why many verses of the Quran bring the creations into focus. Allah says, "Say, look at whatever exists in heaven and on earth, but signs and warnings do not benefit the unbelievers."
Yeah, and the Buddha says, "The wise know that anyone in the world who places his trust in the Dharma can say, I am born of Dharma, created by Dharma, an heir of Dharma, no matter what caste he was born into." Quoting a book doesn't validate an invalid fallacious argument.
Allah also says what means. Do they not ponder about their own selves? Allah has created the heavens and
and again, Zeus says, "My brothers, we were forged in victory, a victory that ended the Great War and brought forth the reign of Mount Olympus. Born from the depths of the underworld, rooted in the river of souls, our mountain emerged out of chaos." Quoting something doesn't make it true.
He also says what means. Have they not?
Okay, I'm going to skip the rest of the Quranic quotes within this video, because Merciful Servant doesn't include them to bolster his arguments, he includes them to preach to the choir.
So everything that has originated is in itself a direct proof that there is an originator.
No, it's not. So far as we know, nothing at all came into existence from absolutely nothing. And again, we know that complex things, such as sandstones, can and do emerge from unconscious natural processes.
What is meant by proof on the basis of providence? It means that everything ultimately in existence started from the quarks, which are the smallest subatomic particles ever allocated up to the galaxies, carries an extent of functional complexity.
Functional complexity, huh? This sounds suspiciously like a rendition of Paley's watchmaker analogy.
This means that each has a specific and specialized function, and a functional complexity necessarily means a grade above mere existence. So, everything around you is designed in a special method so as to carry on a special function. Hence, everything around you carries a functional complexity, and this complexity is a proof of origination, which means that it must have had an originator.
Okay, so the emphasis on complexity requiring a more complex creator does indeed make this a version of the watchmaker analogy, which is an insanely popular argument and one that I've already addressed in great detail. However, I'll of course address it here too, but before I do, here's the rest of Merciful Servant's rendition.
An example of this is the lamp. This is a functional complexity. The electric lamp is made up of a coil, a lead wire that connects electricity to the coil, inert gas that protects the coil and does not affect it or the electricity, a glass bulb that prevents the entry of air or the exit of the inert gas, which would otherwise burn the coil, and finally the base of the lamp, which connects the lamp with the socket and ensures the passage of the electrical current.
So Merciful Servant is using a lamp where Paley used a watch, but the argument is exactly the same. It's the assertion that complexity requires a more complex creator.
Here, the electric lamp demonstrates a system of complexity that cannot be dismissed or simplified, since it carries a rudimentary, rational indication to the mastery of the manufacturer. Then, the one who denies the masterful formation of the lamp or assumes that it originated by chance is the one required to fetch a proof to his assumption.
So there's a great many flaws with the watchmaker analogy, or in this case the lamp analogy, and I think the best way to expose them is to first simplify the argument, and so here's its syllogistic form. Premise 1, the light bulb is complex. Premise 2, the light bulb had a creator. Premise 3, the human is complex. Conclusion, therefore the human had a creator. Now, while complexity does not necessitate an even more complex creator, as already demonstrated in reference to sandstones, let's just assume that it did, that the human must have had an intelligent creator because the human has functional complexity. What then? Well, since it would follow that the creator of humans must itself be more complex, we'd have to ask who created the creator, and who created the creator's creator, and so on and so forth. You see, the assertion that complexity requires a more complex creator is self-refuting because it necessitates an infinite regress. It necessitates turtles all the way down. Now, many theists respond to this criticism by asserting that their God is a special case that doesn't require a more complex creator, but this is simply special pleading, and to anyone who actually cares about truth, it's not nearly good enough. Moving on, the lamp analogy is entirely predicated on a false analogy fallacy, because it insists that because two things share one quality in common, which in this case is complexity, they must also share another quality in common, which in this case is a creator, when this simply cannot be logically inferred. It's as fallacious as asserting that because the light bulb is complex, and because the light bulb was invented in 1879, therefore because the human is complex, it too must have been invented in 1879. Just because two things have one thing in common, this doesn't mean that they share another thing in common. Another damning flaw with this argument that's worth mentioning is that it commits a false cause fallacy. It does this because it asserts that complexity can only be caused by a creator, when not only has this not been proven to be the case, it's actually been proven not to be the case. As said earlier, the sandstone is complex, and yet we know it wasn't created by a conscious creator. It was created by a collection of unconscious natural processes, and the same is true of such things as the earth, the moon, and the sun.
While having a diverse array of lamps can never be a proof that it is all just mere chance. Using this same rationalization, we can deduct that a creature with all this functional complexity, the human being, must have had an originator. So, if you look at the four components of the lamp and deduce that it must have had a maker, and you do not realize that you too must have had a maker, then the problem is in your way of thinking.
So notice Merciful Servant's emphasis on mere chance being the only other alternative.
Just mere chance.
Because in doing this, he's committing a black and white fallacy. He's presenting two possibilities as if they are the only, without justifying why they are the only. And what's worse is that he's completely ignoring a third possibility, that being evolution by natural selection. You know, the very bedrock of biology that's supported by every field of study that it confronts, such as anatomy, paleontology, geology, embryology, neurobiology, medicine, and genetics. Without getting into it too deeply, when an organism is conceived, it receives a copy of its parent's DNA, but sometimes the copy is imperfect, and we label these imperfections mutations. Now, if that mutation gives the offspring a greater chance of surviving and reproducing than its counterparts, then it will be more prevalent within the next generation, and thus, nature can, and indeed does, produce ever more complex organisms, and again, it does so unconsciously. And the last point I want to make is that the reason we can infer that lamps are created by intelligent agents has nothing to do with complexity. It's because we have countless examples of lamps being created by intelligent agents and none being created without one. But in contrast, we have inferred countless examples of species emerging from natural selection and none being created by an intelligent designer.
Allah says what means...
No.
Allah says...
Please, stop it.
Hence existence. Proof on the basis of existence, and regulating creation, proof on the basis of providence, are both rational evidences to the presence of an originator.
Hence, these two proofs of Allah, and with it Merciful Servant's assertion that atheism is over, is debunked. Likewise to most theistic arguments, this has been nothing more than a mere repackaging of outdated and already debunked arguments. Anyhow, as always, thank you kindly for the view, and an extra special thank you to my wonderful patrons and those of you who have donated via PayPal. Together, we're truly making an impact, and for that, you rock. Until next time, my fellow apes, until next time.